What is up everyone, welcome to another camera comparison video. Yeah, on the left that's OnePlus 8T and on the right that's Xiaomi Mi 10T Pro. I think this one is one of the most requested camera comparison video of this channel. I wish you enjoyed this video, and if you really like this video then please don't forget to click on the like button and subscribe to this channel. That helps a lot.
We don't have to go back to what we used to.
First, let's quickly talk about the testing process. All of these pictures were taken on auto mode with AI enabled and auto HDR. Of course, both of these have pro modes, so if you have the time to dial in and switch between options, then you can try to get a pro shot of your choice. But most of the general users uses the auto mode, and I feel like this represents true pros and cons of the smartphones. OnePlus 8T and Xiaomi Mi 10T Pro almost belongs to the same price segment with similar type of rear camera setup. And from my previous camera review videos, I think this is going to be a very exciting test. Okay, after doing an extensive test and looking at all the pictures side by side, there are definitely some differences. When it comes to daytime pictures, they look vastly different, and I'm not surprised to see so much variance when it comes to the exposure. But I am really super surprised to see the difference in color grading and saturation. In some pictures, this issue is really so big that images looks totally different. Even at a glance, we can see the difference in color temperature, and sometimes OnePlus 8T contrast ratio and midtones are way too high. There are variances in sky color rendition and structural details. Dynamic range sometimes goes back and forth, but just as expected, Mi 10T Pro grabbed more details, processed more textures with plenty of sharpness and better color. OnePlus 8T continued to slightly overexpose even in ultra-wide shots. This little extra exposure on OnePlus 8T makes images looks better in certain conditions with more pleasing white balance and wider dynamic range. But if you check carefully, then you can clearly see that Mi 10T Pro kept the skin tone close to reality, continued to process more details in the shadows. I think overall daytime ultra-wide shots are similar without any drastic differences. Results are a bit different in indoor environment under bright lighting condition. Both kept the trend of outdoor ultra-wide photos. If I have forgot to mention, then OnePlus 8T got a bigger 16 megapixel sensor for ultra-wide shots, and Mi 10T Pro got a 13 megapixel sensor underneath that ultra-wide lens. I think the main difference remains in details, texture processing and sharpness. Xiaomi Mi 10T Pro has more details, sharpness and better white balance. Yes, skin tone is a bit saturated and contrast ratio sometimes gets decreased when it fails to detect well-lit areas, but overall image is close to reality. Dynamic range and texture post-processing is really very average on OnePlus 8T. If you have checked the floor, then I think you have already noticed that. Let's check some main sensor photos taken in indoor environment. But before that, I really don't know why OnePlus continued to use Sony IMX586 48 megapixel sensor as a main sensor. And besides Samsung HMX 108 megapixel sensor of Xiaomi Mi 10T Pro, it seems a bit inferior. Wait, I'm not saying that Xiaomi Mi 10T Pro produced top-class images. Both of these two have their own pros and cons, and based on personal preference, some people may actually like a bit exposed and brighter images. But in terms of color rendition, details in shadows, texture processing, HDR, noise level and white balance, I think OnePlus 8T failed to put up a good fight. I think this is the most important part of this comparison. We will go through a lot of differences and similarities. Okay, I always believe that white balance and color tone can be fixed or edited if necessary at a later point. But you cannot add more details. You cannot add structural sharpness while editing. The first thing you would notice is white balance issue. OnePlus 8T continued to produce images with warm tone and Xiaomi Mi 10T Pro kept its cool tone. Other than that, due to its aperture and shutter speed, Mi 10T Pro fails to process and produce good pictures if there is any movement while snapping a photo. But if you have time, if you use a tripod, you can get something better. Despite all these issues, dynamic range of Xiaomi Mi 10T Pro is really good. It is of course better than OnePlus 8T. Sometimes the difference is not visible at a glance, but after grabbing and comparing tons of pictures, I can say clearly Xiaomi Mi 10T Pro dynamic range and noise removing algorithm is as good as OnePlus 8 Pro, if not better. I am doing a dedicated night mode camera comparison between Xiaomi Mi 10T Pro, Xiaomi Mi 10 Ultra, OnePlus 8 Pro and OnePlus 8T. Please subscribe and stay tuned for that video. Let's switch to portrait mode. Both Xiaomi Mi 10T Pro and OnePlus 8T have to use their main sensor to grab the portrait shots, and yes, there is a 2 megapixel depth sensor on OnePlus 8 Pro, which I really think is an unnecessary thing and a marketing gimmick. Xiaomi Mi 10T Pro doesn't have any depth sensor. In an indoor artificial light condition, it is surprising to see edge detection and bokeh effect is better on Xiaomi Mi 10T Pro. Both produced portrait photos with warm tone and saturation. None of these managed to reproduce true to life skin tone. Change of time and place and results are not the same. I should say there is a drastic difference in daytime portrait photos. Both have a few similar issues like aggressive separation of subject and background, blurriness seems slightly more than usual or necessary, random artifacts and sharp cutouts around the edges, higher shadows with lower midtones, and most interestingly, if a face was detected, then some kind of skin smoothing beauty effect was added. It is very difficult to say for sure which one of these two smartphones have better edge detection, cause none of these performed consistently and managed to detect edges perfectly all the time. Moving on to selfie camera, and there is a drastic difference in performance. Xiaomi Mi 10T Pro continues to reproduce photos with better color rendering and skin tone, but selfie photos produced by Mi 10T Pro is a bit saturated and midtones are also a bit high. I have mentioned this earlier in my other camera comparison videos. All OnePlus 8 series smartphones have this issue. When I am wearing a mask, it goes wild, fails to maintain correct exposure, and sometimes the subject gets washed out. In these pictures, face of Samara looks like a ghost, and Mi 10T Pro with more details, sharpness is clearly the winner of selfie photos. If you are subscribed to this channel, if you have watched my other camera comparison videos, then you may know that I try to shoot videos in the same place with all the smartphones to make a general performance graph. These video clips were recorded at 4K 30 frames per second, and I am impressed with the performance of OnePlus 8T. Most of the Xiaomi and Redmi smartphones have this issue. These smartphones don't export videos in REC 709 format and color grading gets disrupted. We can fix this manually, but I think Xiaomi could provide an update and fix it within the stock camera application. Surprisingly, white balance, saturation and color rendition of OnePlus 8T is better than Mi 10T Pro. Details and textures are similar on both. Also, I don't see much difference in dynamic range. However, Mi 10T Pro under harsh lighting sometimes failed to maintain exposure and increased highlights. I think it's time to wrap up this comparison video with a verdict. Okay, I'm not going to give any verdict cause I have given my verdict through this video. I have already shared what I want you to know. I want to know what do you think about these two smartphones. Please don't forget to make a comment, and if you have liked this video, then please don't forget to click on the like button and subscribe to this channel.
No one else out here, find ourselves out here. We could disappear into this atmosphere where this water's clear, yeah. We don't have to go back to what we used to.